Some things happen without explanation. Some experiences haunt people for a lifetime. This is where I tell those mysteries. And remember, not everything can be explained. Story: don't go looking for the 10 leaping lords of Angel Hills. I'm going to die tonight. The stone certainty of my death sits with me as I type this out. Something keeps dragging my eyes to the small window in my bedroom. There are only a few hours left. It gets dark so early here around Christmas. I want to run, maybe hide, definitely fight. But more than anything, I want to record what I found so that the story doesn't die with me. My hometown is run by a secret group of baby-eating, soul-fucking, violence-worshipping monsters, the 10 Lords of Angel Hills. It started 2 days ago at the library. I was alone in the basement, pouring through stacks of old census data and newspaper archives. It was my senior year at college, and my history BA depended heavily on one final capstone project. So I sacrificed my Saturday to research everything I could about obscure traditions in the town of Angel Hills Est. 1668. The basement was comfortable, warm, filled with the quiet drum of icy rain, finding the room's only window set high on the wall. My stomach was minutes away from convincing me to take a break for lunch when I decided to click through one last collection of scanned newspaper images. That's what got me. That's why I'm going to die tonight. I recognized a face in a picture. I leaned in closer to the screen, wiping at a smudge on my glasses. The picture was from the May 21, 1968 edition of the Angel Hills Herald Society section. It was some kind of town-wide celebration, a parade on Main Street. The man was standing with the crowd on the sidewalk at the edge of the image. There was nothing special about the figure that should have caught my eye. He was tall, balding, and well-dressed, but so were quite a few of the people present. It was the 1960s after all. Some men put on a three-piece suit just to go check the mail. No, there wasn't anything obvious about the man in the crowd that explained the chill that went slithering down my spine, but staring at the picture on the screen filled me with a fuzzy kind of dread. I knew the man. How did I know him? Then it clicked. I frantically retraced my search until I found an older article from the Herald. Angel Hills, September 1945, VJ Day. A different picture, a different parade, but the same balding man standing at the edge of the crowd as floats drove by. I clicked back and forth between the two pictures dozens of times. 1945, 1978, 1945, 1978. A 33-year gap, but the man hadn't aged a day. Even the suit looked the same. I told myself that Angel Hills was a small town. The two men might be relatives, maybe even father and son. But the more I stared, the more it became obvious that I wasn't seeing a resemblance. The balding men were identical, down to the pocket watches peeking out from their vests. Growing anxiety opened sharp wings in my chest. I began flipping through other photos from different decades in Angel Hills. Now that I knew what to look for, I spotted the man over and over again. It became a perverse game of Where's Baldo as I combed through the town's history. Here he was again in a crowd picture from 1993, celebrating the opening of a new pharmacy. Then here again in a photo from 1956. Again in 88, 2010, 39, 2020, just 2 months ago, asterisk. The same face, same suit, same watch. The proof I found, the sicker I felt. Then I started to notice that the balding man wasn't the only familiar face. A young woman in a blue dress, a thin boy in a newsy cap, an old man with a cane and hard eyes. They were never the focus of any of the pictures, only ever in the background. I counted 10 recurring faces, denizens of Angel Hills that never aged or changed in any way. After hours of staring at the screen taking notes, the rumble of my empty stomach finally dragged me back to the present. It was 4:15 p.m., nearly dark. I could hear the sound of caroling from outside drifting through the basement's small window. Angel Hills took Christmas seriously, and we were only a few days away. The entire town was wrapped in bright lights and tinsel, like a prisoner in festive chains. I glanced down at my notebook. It was filled with mad scribbles and notations. Would anyone believe what I'd found? 10, at least 10, immortals who weren't exactly camera shy. I mentally dubbed them the 10 Lords of Angel Hills. Well, people would have to believe me, wouldn't they? The proof was right there in black and white, and occasionally color. My gaze went back to the screen where I had the picture from 68 open. I let out a sound that you could fairly describe as a whimper. The photo was different. The balding man was now facing the camera, facing me, dead on. His face was pulled back in a snarl, hate coming off of the picture in waves, eyes locked on mine. I quickly closed the screen and sat breathing hard. A thump from the library above me made me jump. They'd be closing up soon, holiday hours, but I wasn't ready to move. Cold suspicion brought me back to the computer. I opened one of the other photos. This one was from 77, some event in the park. It contained 2 of the Lords. My hands were shaking so badly the mouse jittered around the screen. This picture was also different. The Lords had turned to face the camera, faces stitched with malice, all teeth and glint and rage. All of it pointed right at me. Nearly panting, I moved my chair to the side. I gasped when both Lords' heads snapped to follow me. I turned off the monitor, then unplugged the computer for good measure. Another thump from upstairs caused me to spring out of my chair. A shadow passed in front of the tiny window. The sound of caroling was gone, and I suddenly felt perfectly, truly alone. I gathered my things and left the basement at a gallop. The library was dark, deserted. I burst out of the stairwell just as the librarian was locking up the main entrance. "Oh, shoot, I forgot you were down there," he told me as I hurried past him. "Glad we didn't lock you in for the night." "Yeah, me too," I said, already halfway out the door. Sunset was still 30 minutes away, but dusk came early for Angel Hills that night. Thick clouds carpeted the sky like insulation drained of all color. Snow fell in fat crystals as I shot through the parking lot towards the bike rack. All I could think of was getting home to my apartment, pouring a drink, and locking my door. I might toss a homemade barricade in for good measure. As the wind picked up, snow slicing at my exposed face, I cursed my decision to bike to the library. I felt exposed, fragile. When I got to the rack, I took a moment to just breathe. Some of what I'd seen with the pictures, the moving faces, that could be my imagination. I'd spent the entire day staring at faded photos on a computer screen. Maybe the motion was an optical illusion, or a hallucination brought on by stress. I'd nearly talked myself down from panic mode when I glanced up and froze. There was a young boy standing on the roof of the house across from the library. He was wearing an old-fashioned suit, with shorts and a flat cap. I recognized him as one of the 10 Lords from the pictures. The boy didn't move, only looked down at me, face half lost in the shadow from a streetlight. I tried to speak, but the words crawled back from my mouth into the security of my throat. Walking my bike, I slowly headed towards the sidewalk, eyes never leaving the boy on the roof. His head turned to track my movement, he stood still. Once I was out on the pavement, I jumped on my bike and pedaled like the devil was on my heels. My apartment was on the edge of town, less than a mile from the library. I felt every inch of the ride. When I stopped at the first intersection to wait for the light, I risked a look backward to see if the boy had followed me. He had, and so had the rest of the Lords. I counted 10 shadows on nearby rooftops, 10 figures standing dead still. I couldn't see their faces, but I recognized the forms. I'd spent all afternoon looking at their pictures. I'm not sure how they knew I'd caught on to them, but there they were, a pack on the hunt, and I was the rabbit. I shot through the intersection without waiting for the light to change, barely dodging a pickup. The snowfall was picking up, killing my visibility. To my right, the sun was nearly set, clouds blurring the line between afternoon and night. Angel Hill streets and sidewalks were nearly empty, all of the same people warm at home, doors locked against the dark. I pedaled madly through the quiet town, shooting my head back when I dared to track the Lords. They were moving silently, leaping from rooftop to rooftop. I recognized several whenever they came close to the streetlights. The balding Lord with his suit and pocket watch was closest, moving on all fours from house to house like some demented cricket. A few of the lords leaped ahead, so much faster than I could bike. I realized that there was no way I could outrun them. Could I fight? Could I call for help? I slid my bike to a halt and looked around for someone, anyone. The streets were empty, but a few cars rolled by. Why weren't the drivers slamming the brakes, screaming? Why hadn't anyone called the police, the military, the fucking Vatican? Was I the only one who could see the lords leaping across Angel Hills? I debated the merits of biking into the middle of the road and grabbing the first motorist that stopped, forcing them to look up at the rooftops. But a little voice in my head told me that wouldn't help. I saw the lords because I knew what to look for, just like with the old pictures. They were always there, hiding in plain sight, at the edge of awareness. As I sat in the snow, considering my options, the lords made the decision for me. They began to drop from the rooftops like snakes from branches, landing silently in the snow. I was still half a mile from my apartment, and I'd seen how fast they could move. Feeling trapped, I searched the area for anywhere to hide, any protection. My eyes locked on the small church just off Main Street. I was already running before my bike fell to the ground. I had tunnel vision focused on the big wooden double doors of the church. In my peripherals, shadowy figures moved closer. I went through the entrance at a run and only stopped to slam the lock. The church was empty, lit only by candles and runoff from the street lamps outside. I slid to the ground with my back against the door and waited. There was a knock, then a tap on the stained glass window to my right. The sounds were polite, unhurried, almost playful. I didn't see a priest or custodians anywhere. I was alone. A massive nativity scene sprawled in front of the altar, full of plaster saints and wooden wise men. The scent of old incense from a mass earlier that day lingered in the air. I breathed deep, trying to find my steady place. The tapping at the window came again. There was a shadow outside the stained glass. The scene on the window was beautiful, something with angels and trees. Tap, tap, tap. My steady place was well and truly fucked. "What do you want?" I shouted. "What?" The thing on the other side of the window told me. I wished so very much that I'd never asked. All throughout the night, the Lord whispered horrible truths and secrets. No matter where I hid in the church, I heard the voice clear as a plague bell. 9 other shadows perched outside different windows, watching me, whispering their own stories. The lords told me that they'd been with Angel Hills since the beginning. They told me about their shared love for violence, pulling wings or limbs off anything they pleased just to watch the agony. I was an unwilling witness to their history and to their plans for the future. Eventually, I curled up in a ball on the altar under the huge crucifix. I begged them to kill me, to make it stop, but they didn't. Maybe the church kept them out. Or maybe they were content to pull off my mind's wings with their words, to watch the hope die in me. Whatever their reasons, the lords didn't kill me last night, but as morning broke, they promised to return at sundown. They'd take me then. "Enjoy your day," the shadow in the window told me. "Live it like it's your last. It'll be dark soon, so fucking soon. I'm not sure yet whether I'll run or hide or fight or just wait for it. But I won't go quietly. If you've read this far, that means I got everything uploaded in time. Maybe you believe me, maybe you think I'm full of shit. I don't care. Just keep my advice in mind. If you're in Angel Hills and you see a familiar face, one that tickles your memory, but you don't immediately recognize, let it go. Don't take a second look. Because if you happen to spot any of the 10 lords of Angel Hills, I promise you this. They will notice you back. Story: The Infinite Hunger of the Cannibal Killers. The hotel I died in didn't look like all that much from the outside. Old stone and new glass, the non-dormant wanted to appear classic. Personally, I figured it was trying too hard. A Four Seasons knockoff. Hollywood, California aspirations with Hollywood, Florida style. The sign on the front desk read, "Back in 8 minutes." I wasn't sure if a font could be sarcastic, but if it could, the little sign was dripping with it. Luckily, I saw a skinny guy farther behind the desk, doing some kind of inventory on keys hanging from the wall. Reservation for 1706, I said, loudly ringing the bell to get the man's attention. The shiny brass name tag pinned to his red vest simply said, Concierge. Adjusting round gold-rimmed glasses, the concierge smiled politely. I'm sorry, but we don't take reservations on floor 17 of the Hotel Non-Dormient, he told me. How nice for you, but that's what it says right here. I pushed the screen of my phone towards his face. Room 1706, right? The concierge's smile dropped. He began to quietly peck at the computer behind the worn welcome desk. My apologies, he replied, sliding me an old key. It seems you're correct. I winked, took the key, and slouched my way towards the bar to meet Abby. The hotel hadn't done much to impress me, but the bar, it was quality. Well, that and quantity. Liquor lined the mirrored shelves in a translucent rainbow of whiskey reds and gin blues. A small chalkboard hanging next to the mirror proclaimed every hour a happy hour. Drink prices fulfilled that promise. The guy behind the bar, he seemed less quality. Wearing the same red vest as the concierge and a brass name tag, bartender, but with the addition of an old-fashioned white medical mask, the man never seemed to fully come into the light. Not that I was spending much time looking at the bartender considering what Abby was wearing. She was poured into the dress, tight and smooth, black and backless. I could see the small movements of the muscles dance between her shoulder blades when she laughed. Her hair was blonde this week, her skin flawless. She was young and pretty and all mine. Did you get the key? She whispered to me as we sat at the bar waiting for our second round of drinks. Well, my second round. Her voice was already whiskey, washed. I imagined she'd gotten a head start on me. I slid the key over to her. Sure, but what in the world were you thinking picking this dump? Abby shrugged those perfect shoulders. It was a great deal. I got an email advert for the place out of the blue, and it seemed just right for, you know. She gave me a cat-eyed smirk as the bartender served our drinks. Abby tipped hers back in one go, then signaled for another. I've got to powder my nose, she giggled, stumbling away. What brings you to the hotel? I looked up from my beer to find the bartender regarding me, blue eyes like sunken candles above his mask. I took another drink before responding. Business, I muttered. The bartender began making Abby's next drink. Your friend work with you? What makes you think she's my friend? Maybe she's my wife. I couldn't see the bartender's mouth, but I could sense him smile. Apologies, it's just the age difference. And of course, you're wearing a ring, and she is not. You're observant, I said through gritted teeth. He shrugged. Nature of the job. I sipped at my beer. Say, if I wanted to order room service later, champagne, strawberries, all that fun stuff, how late do you all deliver? Depends on where your room is. Huh, that's odd, I replied. We're in 1706. The bartender's eyebrows ticked up. I didn't know floor 17 was open again. Yeah, you and the guy at check-in both seem pretty ill-informed about the goings-on of your own place of employment, I said. I suppose you have me there, sir, he replied, leaning on the bar. His eyes were much, much greener than I'd initially thought, and they had me pinned to my seat. Thing is, there's a very good reason that floor 17 has been closed for reservations for a very long time. The concierge must have told you about the incident. I cleared my throat. Nothing was mentioned, no. About 20 years ago, 3 visitors, not guests, made their way up to floor 17. The bartender was close to me. I wanted very much to look away. Couldn't. They put a chain and lock on the door to the stairs. Over the next 32 minutes, the trio made their way down the hall, clearing room by method of sledgehammer entry. By the time police were able to gain access to the floor, all 11 guests, as well as the 3 strangers, were found slaughtered. Several guests showed signs of bite marks, consumption. The 3 killers seemed to have died by their own hands, their own knives, their own teeth. The bartender finally leaned back. So, to answer your question, there's no room service available to floor 17. I like your eagerness to get to the room, Tony, but I wanted a few more drinks, Abby whined. I watched the floor numbers light up as the elevator rose. I told you, babe, the bartender was giving me the creeps. He was eyeing you funny. Probably would have put something in your drink. Abby pursed her lips. Maybe the room will have a minibar. The door slid open with a lonely ding. Thick blue carpet and peeling paint greeted us as we stepped out of the elevator. My eyes wandered the wall in front of the elevator, fixating on a cheesy painting of a family at the beach. Even the air in the hallway smelled tacky. I heard the doors click closed behind us. And then I heard the rusty chime of a harmonica. "Tony," Abby whispered, looking past my shoulder. I turned to my left. 3 figures were standing at the end of the hall, 2 men and a woman. The men were in the middle of wrapping a long, dull chain around the safety bar on the stairwell door. The woman was leaning against the wall, silver harmonica to her lips, watching me and Abby. "The fuck?" I muttered. Besides the harmonica, I could see the woman had a knife in her other hand. The men were similarly armed, the bigger one picking up a sledgehammer as they finished with the door. When all 3 turned to face us, I noticed they had painted faces, not camouflage, more like shapes and suns and clovers, like they'd just left a carnival. There was a feather tucked at an angle in the woman's headband, brown and plain, like from a duck. "We should get back in the elevator," Abby whispered, tugging at my arm. I frowned, pieces clicking into place in my mind. They're fucking with us. Abby was already desperately slamming the open door button. What? The bartender, these fucks, the hotel staff. They're fucking with us, trying to scare us. I was tapping my closed fist against my leg. I'm not going to stand for this. I'm not going to be mocked. Why the hell would anyone do that? Abby asked. That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. Well, sweetie, the alternative is that there are 3 psycho killers walking this way. I snorted. Then I walked to meet the trio. The woman kept playing her harmonica as we grew close, some song low and lonesome. I planted myself a few feet away from the group. I don't know what the fuck you people think. I never saw her hand move or heard the music stop. There was a blur and then more pain than I've ever experienced ripping through my stomach. I looked down to find the hilt of a kitchen knife sticking out of me just above the belly button. As I watched, too stunned to yell, the woman dragged the blade up, struggling but making terrible progress. I was an envelope being slid open. There was a loosening, and I felt my guts begin to slide, purple-red pile, down to the floor. That's when I screamed, but only for a moment. The woman pulled her harmonica away long enough to sink her teeth into my throat and tear a chunk away. I fell, slipping on my own wet organs. I heard Abby scream behind me. The trio walked over me as I bled. At least the shock made me numb as my vision blackened. Just before the world went black, I heard the harmonica start again. I opened my eyes and saw my terrified reflection in the mirrored elevator door. Abby's reflection stood next to mine. I turned to her just as she began to weep. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? She sobbed. Abby, I said. What happened? She slid down to sit on the floor of the elevator. Oh God, I think I died. I think they killed us. Oh, Tony, they were eating me. Just a dream, I whispered. Or a trick, or... The elevator drifted to a halt and the doors opened. Ding. Abby yelped and hit the closed door button. Nothing happened. She hit it over and over again. The door stayed open. I heard the harmonica begin to play. Come on, I grunted, running without looking to see if Abby was following. I saw the trio the moment I stepped out of the elevator. They were watching me with their painted faces, already strolling down the hall. Room 1706 was 3 doors down from the elevator on the left. I've counted many times. I let out a ragged breath, half laugh and half scream when I reached the door. The trio wasn't hurrying to catch me. I had a few precious seconds to get inside. Except I didn't have the key. Abby hadn't followed me. She was still in the elevator and its door was still open. I could hear her crying and even the click of the button being pressed over and over with no result. As the killers passed the elevator, the smaller man peeled off and climbed through the door. I couldn't see inside, but Abby began to shriek. My feet were rooted to the carpet. The girl and the big man were nearly to 1,706 before I snapped out of my haze and turned to run. My knee popped like a grape under a boot as the big man's sledgehammer connected. I was mid-step and my leg buckled, screaming and cursing as I fell. I'll always remember the feel of the rough carpet as I tried to crawl away. Then the slight weight of the girl settled on my back. Please, please, I begged. Don't. The knife, cold and long, stabbed into my lower back. Once, then again, and then it scraped the bone. I realized she was cutting pieces off of me. She giggled as she ate. It took me such a long time to die. The elevator ride on our third trip felt unbearably long, yet still over too soon. Stick with me, goddammit, I whispered to Abby. Stay with me, and give me the fucking key. Abby only nodded, handed me the room key, and stared as the numbers crept up towards 17. The moment the doors opened, we were moving. I only glanced back once when I heard the harmonica start. The trio was there. Of course they were there, at the end of the hall. They came towards us, but they never rushed. For one god-awful moment, the key didn't seem to fit. Plessy, I yelled out loud. Click. The key turned and the door opened. Abby and I stumbled inside. I slammed the door behind us, turning the lock and throwing the deadbolt. We stood, gasping for air, watching and listening for several seconds. Did we? Abby began, her question giving bloody birth to a scream as the door cracked under a heavy blow. The second hit from the sledgehammer knocked the deadbolt out, and the third opened the door. That time, at least, they were quick with us, professional, like they were on a schedule. But I still remember every second of it, every bite they took. We exited the elevator that fourth time with a plan. Once we made it into the room, Abby and I immediately began to barricade the door. The dresser, the nightstands, the television, the mini fridge, anything in room 1706 that wasn't nailed down, was quickly dragged into a palisade. I didn't think it would be enough, but when the sledgehammer boomed again and again, the door held. Wood cracked. Abby shrieked. I was starting to hate the sound, but everything held. The trio moved on, and I heard other rooms facing the hammer, other guests beginning to scream. We were safe. Christ, what if they come back? Abby asked. Tears had left twin inky rivers of mascara snaking down her cheeks. I tried the room's phone, but the line was dead. Our cell phones received no signal. All Abby and I could do was wait, stranded, hoping help would arrive. We curled up together on the bed, still fully clothed. The bartender's words struck me as I lay looking into Abby's red eyes. 32 minutes. What? Abby asked. I sat up in bed, checking the time on my phone. The bartender told me the original killing spree on floor 17 lasted for 32 minutes. We just need to sit tight and wait this out. The minutes crawled by like a wounded animal. I wasn't sure how long it had taken us to make it from the elevator into the room, then to build our barricade, but certainly not more than a few minutes. Just as my phone's stopwatch ticked up towards 29 minutes, I felt the room shift. I had to close my eyes to suppress vertigo. When I opened them, Abby and I were back in the elevator. No, 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 I yelled, pounding on the inside of the door. Abby sank to the ground and didn't move when we arrived at floor 17. Get up, I barked. We have to. What's the point? Abby asked, staring at the ground. What's the point anymore? I tried to drag her up, but she fought back with surprising ferocity. We struggled, but I guess it was long enough. When I finally wrenched her purse with the key away, I turned to find the trio watching us from the elevator opening. I felt my bladder let loose, warmth running down my leg. I guess they didn't like it when we refused to run because they made that death one of the slowest. The next time, Abby ran with me, and the time after that, and on and on. Usually, if we didn't hesitate, we would be safe. Every now and then, the barricade might not hold, and the trio would get into the room. A few times, instead of their careless stroll, they would immediately run after us the second we left the elevator. But most times we survived. 32 minutes can feel like an eternity in only a moment. Run and wait, run and wait, run and die, run and wait, repeat. I lost track of how many loops we completed after the first few dozen. Maybe a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 or 1,000,000. Early on, Abby would attempt small talk or ask me to hold her. I wasn't much inclined. This is your fault, I told her after a particularly gruesome loop where our barricade didn't hold. You booked this room. You brought us here. She was silent for a long moment before responding. I'm not sure if I've ever loved you, Tony. Of course not. I muttered, raiding the minibar for a drink before we reset again. Who the hell was talking about love anyway? After a lifetime of running between the elevator and room 1706, I did something I'd never done before. I started to pray. Not to God or anyone in particular. I prayed to anyone or anything listened. I would give anything to leave. There was a knock at the door. I froze with the television still in my arms, the last piece of our new barricade. "We have an offer," came a soft call from the other side of the door. The voice was like silk-wrapped wind chimes swaying in a breeze. The woman. "Whichever one of you opens the door first gets to leave. You can leave the room, this floor, this hotel, but it's a one-time offer, so act while supplies last." I could see Abby considering, eyes flitting back and forth between me and the barricade. "It's a trick," I hissed. "They just want in." After a moment, Abby's shoulders slumped. She nodded in agreement and closed her eyes. That gave me all of the time I needed to break the television over her head. It only took a minute to clear the barricade. I swallowed before opening the door, but I knew it didn't really matter. If this was a trick, the worst they could do was kill me all over again. "We were hoping you would be the one," the woman said, staring in through the crack in the door. The carnival face paint made her eyes look predatory. Even the duck feather felt sinister, jutting out of her headband like an ice pick raised for a lobotomy. I opened the door the rest of the way, and the three walked in. "Go ahead," the woman told me as she moved towards Abby's crumbled form. "Get gone." As I ran down the hallway, I found myself hoping the blow from the television had killed Abby. I owed her that much mercy at least. By some miracle, the elevator doors were closed, and it responded when I pushed the call button. Somehow, that wait for the elevator felt longer than the thousands of loops I'd experienced on floor 17. I kept anticipating a knife in the back, or worse, a reset. When the elevator doors opened, I collapsed inside, sobbing like a lost child reunited with their mother. The ride down to the lobby may have been the happiest minutes of my life. The doors opened again on the ground floor, and all I could do was crawl out. My eyes made level with two pairs of boots, and I looked up. A wiry man with a mop and a short woman, both in coveralls, stared down at me. I stood up. I noticed they had name tags, the same strange brass as the other hotel staff. The man's read, "Janitor," the woman's, "Pest Control." "You must be the new guest on floor 17, the janitor said, smacking his gum. I stammered but couldn't find any words, none that would make sense. "We're on our way to clean up," the janitor continued. "It's always such a mess." Pest Control looked at me with hard eyes. She pulled out what looked like a miniature bear trap. "For the rats," she whispered. "Blood always brings them swarming." You shouldn't bother," I said. "The whole floor. It resets, restarts." The janitor shrugged. "Time doesn't work the same way for everyone, everywhere, at least not in the non-dormient. There is always disorder on that floor, and it is my obligation to have that sorted as quickly and efficiently as I can." Pest Control grinned. "And I just love my work." They brushed past me into the elevator. Fuck 'em, bunch of wackos. I ran for the lobby door. I was not going to spend a minute longer than necessary in the hotel. As I passed the front desk, though, I came up short. The concierge was watching me, light glinting from his glasses so much I couldn't make out his eyes. There was another man with him behind the desk, tall and broad-shouldered, with a car salesman's grin and a rock star's long hair. His name tag read, "Public Relations." "Checking out?" the concierge asked. I could only nod weakly. Public Relations gestured me forward and I obeyed. He slid a document across the desk. "We understand you may have not had the most enjoyable experience here at the Hotel Non-Dormant. We certainly apologize, but would appreciate it if you signed a basic non-disclosure agreement." I signed without reading. "Can I go?" "Of course." Public Relations flashed his teeth. "Please do, and go with our sincerest apologies." I turned to leave. "In fact, as a sign of goodwill, I want you to know that your next stay with us will be on the house." I let out an insane giggle. "Well, gee, I appreciate that, but I don't think I'll be back anytime soon." "Are you sure?" the concierge asked, checking his computer. "It looks like your next stay is already booked." "No, I whispered. Yes, I've double-checked, he said. Your same room, 1706. Then he told me the date. That's so soon, I said, breathing hard. That's too soon. I would like to cancel. I'm sure you would, the concierge replied. But that's not how it works. If I were you, I'd enjoy the time you have until your next reservation. It looks like you have the room booked for a very, very long stay. I left the hotel in a daze, bumping into people in the street as I walked. It seems I wasn't granted a reprieve, only a delay. I wonder what Abby will say when I return. Maybe I should pick her up a gift, something in the way of apology. Story: She sold happiness in glass jars. The poster read, "Happiness, sold in glass jars, call today," and underneath the text was a phone number. I was walking home from a long, exhausting day of work when I caught a glimpse of the paper stapled on an old telephone pole. I took a picture of it, thinking it was amusing. I was going to show my wife once I got to our apartment, but I was caught up with chores and forgot about it. Dinner, dishes, laundry, packing a snack for our daughter, putting her to bed, then putting her toys away that she'd left out in the living room every night. It was the exact same routine. The next day, I awoke sleeping back to back with my wife. I always had to get up earlier than she did for my job, so I quietly got ready for the day and headed out the door. At work, I was updating the company's latest expense report. Most days were similar to this one. They were basically paying me to stare at a computer for 9 hours a day and input a couple numbers into a spreadsheet. I finished my work very quickly, so I decided to head out of the office early. It also helped that it was a Friday, and a lot of people leave early at the end of the week. On my walk back, I was thinking of what my life had become. I did this often. I always dreamed of traveling when I was younger. I wanted to drive across the country or solo backpack across Europe. Then I met Kelsey. Don't get me wrong, I loved Kelsey. I mean, I still do. We just don't have that spark anymore. When you meet someone and get in a relationship, whether it's meant to be or not, some of your personal life plans have to be put on hold. And then that relationship turns to marriage, and then you have a baby, then you have to enroll your daughter in a preschool, then you have to get a better paying job and work more hours and blah blah blah. I'm not trying to throw a pity party for myself. I'm just saying I wasn't exactly content with where I was in my life. I wouldn't have referred to myself as a happy person. As I took the same route home that I did every day to work and back, I walked by the same poster I had passed the day before. I don't know why, I really don't. But I decided to call the number. I figured it would be some joke. Maybe someone just picks up and says, "I love you," on the other end, and hangs up. Or maybe it's a line to a sex worker. I had no idea what to expect. I called. It only rang once before someone picked up. "Hello?" a woman said. Hi, I'm calling about your poster? Your ad?" "Oh, awesome," she said calmly. "When do you want to pick it up?" "Pick what up?" "The jar," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Oh, of course, I realized then that I had left work early without telling Kelsey, so I could just go pick it up now and she'd be none the wiser. "What exactly is it that you're selling?" "I just told you. It's happiness. In a glass jar, like the poster said. Happiness keeps best in glass jars. They're more durable than, say, a plastic bag." Okay. Should we meet somewhere?" "For sure. I don't want you to end up being a creep or something. So let's go to a public place." The public place we decided on was a Starbucks parking lot a little over a mile from me. Now, I didn't think I was really going to be buying a jar of happiness or whatever. I was 99% sure she was going to sell me drugs. Maybe heroin would be in the jar. I remember thinking, oh no, happiness is probably a nickname for some street drug, and I'm going to a drug deal. What if she's a cop? Am I going to be arrested? But something inside me told me to keep walking, and so I did. I stood outside and texted her. "Me, I'm here." Her, "Cool, be there in a sec." Me, "What are you driving?" Her, "Silver Camry." And as her final text came through, I saw her car pull in. She took a spot not too far from where I stood. I could see there was no one else in the car, which put my kidnapping fear to rest. She opened her door and stood on the pavement, looking around until her eyes met mine. I gave her a little nod of acknowledgement. She simply responded by waving her hand, gesturing for me to come over to her car, so I did. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with curly, golden hair. Her skin was pale and contrasted with the all-black outfit she was wearing. I thought she looked like Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz had put on the Wicked Witch's clothes. "Nice day out," she said as a greeting. "Oh, yeah, it is. Hadn't really paid attention to it. You were the one that called about the jar, right?" "Yeah, that was me." "Cool, well, here you go." She handed me a very small glass mason jar. It couldn't have been more than 2 inches tall. Inside of it was a light. Not a light bulb, just light. It was like someone bottled up sunshine. It glowed even in the mid-afternoon daylight. It looked like a tiny sun, or a tiny universe existing in this little crystal-walled home. I was admiring it with no attempt to hide the awe on my face. "Pretty rad, isn't it?" What is it?" "You've asked that like 3 different times, I think." My answer is still the same. It is happiness. Happiness in a glass jar. What do I do with it? "Keep it," she said simply. "If you have any problems, shoot me a text." She started to get into her car. "Wait," I said. "I thought you were selling this. How much is it?" "Don't worry, man," she said with a smile. "You'll pay." She closed her door, and I stepped out of her way as she backed up, then drove off. What the hell had just happened? What was I holding? I looked down at the jar again. Its radiance was simply mesmerizing. I put it in my pocket and could see its glow slightly through my pants. I began to walk home. What was just a nice sunny day quickly changed into a rainy one with clouds wrapping the sky. It was not forecasted that it would rain, or else I would have ridden the bus or subway to work that day. I jogged home, trying not to get too drenched. I finally found shelter once I made it to my apartment building. I walked up to my door and found that my key wasn't on my key ring anymore. Shit, I can't believe I lost it again, I thought. I knocked on the door and said in a somewhat loud voice, "Hey babe, it's me. I don't know what happened to my key." I heard the door being unlocked from the other side. When the door opened, I was greeted by a large, heavy-set man with greasy hair and unkempt goatee. He said, "I think you got the wrong door, bud." "Oh," I said, disoriented. "My bad. Sorry. Have a good one." He let out a chuckle as he closed the door. Apartment number 33. I know that was my apartment. I know it was. I'd been in apartment 33 for 5 years now, but that was not my apartment. From what I could see inside, all the furniture was different. It was painted a different color. It was all wrong. I felt like I'd hit my head and was drugged. In that moment, nothing made sense. I pulled out my phone to call Kelsey so she could calm me down and tell me I just got confused for a second. But her contact wasn't in my phone. In fact, nothing was in my phone. I had no messages with her. No previous calls. No pictures. It was like my phone reset to its factory settings. Did that girl somehow switch my phone out when I wasn't looking? I would have just dialed Kelsey's number manually, but I couldn't quite remember it. I had known it by heart before, but not anymore. I needed to get back to the office. I had all my contacts backed up on my work computer. Since it was still raining, I hopped on the bus, which had a stop right in front of the apartment complex. I rode downtown toward my office, the whole time staring at my wet shoes, wondering what the hell was going on. We have a keycard access to our building, so only authorized personnel can get inside. I always keep my access card in my wallet, always. But, surprise, surprise, it wasn't there. I buzzed into the speaker we had for guests with appointments, or employees as a backup in case anyone lost or forgot their card. Buzz. "Hey, this is Tim. I must have lost my card. My employee number is..." I stopped as I drew a blank. A voice came through the speaker. "Tim, you got cut out. What's your employee number?" I can't remember. That's fine. Just tell me your full name and department." Finance. I'm in finance. My full name is Tim Brooks." "One sec." About 30 seconds later, the man spoke to me again. "We don't have a Tim Brooks working in this building. Did you have an appointment with someone?" I backed up in surprise, almost tripping on my own feet. I had just been in that office an hour or two ago. What was happening to me? I felt like I was getting Alzheimer's, but going through every stage in one day. I stared at my hands, unsure if I was in the right body. I felt like the world around me was disintegrating. I wasn't in control. I was merely sitting inside somebody else's head, watching the world through their eyes. Just then, I got a text. I recognized the number immediately. It was that girl, the one who gave me the jar. I had forgotten all about it until I saw her text. Her, "Hey, how's it going?" I looked at my phone, dumbfounded. It made me angry she was so nonchalant about this. She knew what was going on. She had done this somehow. Me. What the hell did you do to me? Her, the worst is yet to come. I was astronomically close to just chucking my phone as far as I could in frustration. I took the jar out of my pocket. It looked unchanged, still glowing just as bright. "What the fuck did you do?" I yelled at the jar, realizing I probably looked like a lunatic. As I stared at its glistening glass, I realized something. I didn't know what my wife's face looked like anymore. I knew her name. Well, I know it started with a K, or maybe a C. I couldn't picture her in my mind. I knew I had a wife. I knew I did. Yes, because I had a daughter. I had a wife and a daughter. I just couldn't remember their faces nor their names, or their birthdays, or any memories I had with them. I know they existed. They did exist. I had just seen them that morning, right? I couldn't remember how she looked, or what she smelled like. What was our first date? We had a wedding, right? What about our first kiss? Or my daughter, or was it my son? Maybe I didn't even have a kid. But my wife, or girlfriend, she was real. I knew she was. The thought was tearing me apart. I couldn't see her in my head. I couldn't recall a single fact about her. I was standing outside of the same building, but I was unsure why I was. Did I work there? I must work somewhere. The rain was accompanied by a chilly wind now. It was whipping at my face, making my nose and cheeks sting. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be with her. I wanted to be warm. I wanted to go into a shitty office job that kept a roof over my head. I wanted it all. I was soaking wet. I was miserable. I couldn't remember my parents or my childhood. Did I even have any friends? Why was I in the rain? I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the jar. The only memory of my entire life I could concretely remember was that girl giving it to me, telling me it was happiness. It did not bring happiness. It brought pain. It brought suffering. I was more miserable in that moment than I'd ever been. My phone buzzed. "Break the jar, Tim." I looked at my other hand. With the setting sun and the rainy sky, I swear the jar glowed brighter than any streetlight near me. I didn't break it because I was following her instruction. I broke it because I was angry. I broke it because I was upset. I needed a release. I raised my arm above my head and brought it down with one swift motion, shattering the jar on the concrete beneath my feet. That dark, chilly air accompanying the rain spread away like it was the shockwave of a bomb going off, and I was at the epicenter. I saw the warm, yellow light from inside the jar spread rapidly across the ground and ascend into the sky. It was as if I was watching the beginnings of the universe being created, like God had just snapped his fingers and said, "Let there be light." I was engulfed in it. I could no longer see street or rain or anything dark. I felt like I was plummeting into a star going faster than the speed of light. It felt like sitting in front of a fire on a cold winter's night, but that warmth was covering every inch of my body. And then I blinked. Immediately I could feel the sheets beneath me, and my back barely touching my wife's. I was staring out the window. The morning light drenched through the glass and gleamed on my face. I stood from bed and grabbed my phone. It was Friday morning. I had one text. "Let me know if you ever need another jar." I called in sick to work. I snuck into my daughter's room and greeted her with a kiss and told her she didn't have to go to preschool today. We were going to have a family day. She smiled and stretched out her arms with a yawn before curling up and falling back asleep. I got back in bed and squeezed my wife tightly. I didn't let go for hours. Our daughter came into our room and woke us up. Eventually, she was jumping on the bed and shouting for us to wake up. Yesterday, I may have found that annoying. Yesterday, I may have found a lot of things annoying, or monotonous, or dull. But not today. Today, I pulled her under the covers in between me and Kelsey. Today was going to be a good day. Today, I was happy. Story: A Shattered Life. I don't know when you're going to read this, but I can tell you when it started. I was out for a walk alone in the woods when the entity came for me. It was beyond a blur. It was, for lack of a better term, absence of meaning. Where it hid, there were no trees. Where it crept closer, there was no grass. Through the arc it leapt at me, there was no breeze of motion. There was no air at all. As it struck, I felt the distinct sensation of claws puncturing me somewhere unseen, somewhere I'd never felt before. My hands and arms and legs and torso seemed fine and I wasn't bleeding, but I knew I'd been injured somehow. As I fearfully ran back home, I could tell that I was less. I was vaguely tired, and it was hard to focus at times. The solution at that early stage was easy. A big cup of coffee helped me feel normal again. For a while, that subtle drain on my spirit became lost in the ebb and flow of caffeine in my system. You could say my life began that week, actually, because that was when I met Mar. She and I got along great though. To be honest, I'm pretty sure I fell in love with her over the phone before we even met. It was almost as if the strong emotions of that first week made the entity fight back. It was still with me, latched on to some invisible part of my being. The first few incidents were minor, and I hardly worried about them. The color of a neighbor's car changed from dark blue to black one morning, and I stared at it before shaking my head and shrugging off the difference. 2 days later, at work, a co-worker's name changed from Fred to Dan. I carefully asked around, but everyone said his name had always been Dan. I figured I'd just been mistaken. Then, as ridiculous as this sounds, I was peeing in my bathroom at home when I suddenly found myself on a random street. I was still in my pajamas, pants down, and urinating, but now in full view of a dozen people at a bus stop. Horrified, I pulled up my clothes and ran before someone called the cops. I did manage to get home, but the experience forced me to admit that I was still in danger. The entity was doing something to me, and I didn't understand how to fight back. Mar showed up that evening, but she had her own key. "Hey," I asked her with confusion. "How'd you get a key?" She just laughed. "You're cute. Are you sure you're okay with this?" She opened a door and entered a room full of boxes. I know living together is a big step, especially when we've only been dating 3 months. Living together? I'd literally just met her the week before. Thing was, my mother had always called me a smart cookie for a reason. I knew when to shut my yap. Instead of causing a scene, I told her everything was fine and then I went straight to my room and began investigating. My things were just as I had left them, with no sign of a 3-month gap in habitation, but I did find something out of the ordinary: the date. I shivered angrily as I processed the truth. The entity had eaten 3 months of my life. What the hell was I facing? What kind of creature could consume pieces of one's soul like that? I'd missed the most exciting part of a new relationship, and I would never understand any shared stories or in-jokes from that period. Something absurdly precious had been taken from me, and I was furious. That fury helped suppress the entity. I never imbibed alcohol. I drank coffee religiously. I checked the date every time I woke up. For 3 years, I managed to live each day while observing nothing more than minor alterations. A social fact here and there, someone's job, how many kids they had, that sort of thing, the layout of nearby streets, the time my favorite television show aired, that kind of thing. Always, those changes reminded me the creature still had its claws sunk into my spirit. Not once in 3 years did I ever let myself zone out. One day, I grew careless. I let myself get really into the season finale of my favorite show. It was gripping, a fantastic story. Right at the height of the action, a young boy came up to my lounger and shook my arm. Surprised, I asked, "Who are you? How did you get in here?" He laughed and smiled brightly. "Silly daddy." My heart sank in my chest. I knew immediately what had happened. After a few mass questions, I discovered that he was 2 years old and that he was my son. The agony and heartache filling my chest was nearly unbearable. Not only had I missed the birth of my son, I would never see or know the first years of his life. Mar and I had obviously gotten married and started a family in the time I'd lost, and I had no idea what joys or pains those years contained. It was snowing outside. Holding my sudden son in my lap, I sat and watched the flakes fall outside. What kind of life was this going to be if slips in concentration could cost me years? I had to get help. The church had no idea what to do. The priest didn't believe me and told me I had a health issue rather than some sort of possession. The doctors didn't have any clue. Nothing showed up on all their scans and tests, but they happily took my money in return for nothing. By the time I ran out of options, I decided to tell Mar. There was no way to know what this all looked like from her side. What was I like when I wasn't there? Did I still take our son to school? Did I still do my job? Clearly I did, because she seemed to be none the wiser. But I still had a horrible feeling that something must have been missing in her life when I wasn't actually home inside my own head. But the night I set up a nice dinner in preparation, she arrived not by unlocking the front door, but by knocking on it. I answered, and found that she was in a nice dress. She was happily surprised by the settings on the table. A fancy dinner for a second date? I knew you were sweet on me. Thank the Lord I knew when to keep my mouth shut. If I'd gone on about being married and having a son, she might have run for the hills. Instead, I took her coat and sat down for our second date. Through carefully crafted questions, I managed to deduce the truth. This really was our second date. She saw relief and happiness in me, but interpreted that as dating jitters. I was just excited to realize that the entity wasn't necessarily eating whole portions of my life. The symptoms, as I was beginning to understand them, were more like the consequences of a shattered soul. The creature had wounded me, broken me into pieces. Perhaps I was to live my life out of order, but at least I would actually get to live it. And so it went for a few years from my perspective. While minor changes in politics or geography would happen daily, major shifts in my mental location only happened every couple months. When I found myself in a new place and time in my life, I just shut up and listened, making sure to get the lay of the land before doing anything to avoid making mistakes. On the farthest flung leap yet, I met my 6-year-old grandson, and I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He said, "Writer." I told him that was a fine idea. Then, I was back in month 2 of my relationship with Mar, and I had the best night with her on the riverfront. When I say the best, I mean the best. Knowing how special she would become to me, I asked her to move in. I got to live through what I'd missed the first go-around, and I came to understand that I was never mentally absent. I would always be there eventually. When we were moving her boxes in, she stopped for a moment and said she marveled at my great love, as if I'd known her for a lifetime, and never once doubted she was the one. That was the first time I'd truly laughed freely and wholeheartedly since the entity had wounded me. She was right about my love for her, but for exactly the reason she'd considered a silly romantic analogy. I had known her my whole life, and I'd come to terms with my situation and found peace with it. It wasn't so bad to have sneak peeks at all the best parts ahead. But of course I wouldn't be writing this if it hadn't gotten worse. The entity was still with me. It had not wounded me and departed like I'd wanted to believe. The closest I can describe my growing understanding was that the creature was burrowing deeper into my psyche, fracturing it into smaller pieces. Instead of months between major shifts, I began having only weeks. Once I noticed that trend, I feared my ultimate fate would be to jump between times in my life, heartbeat by heartbeat, forever confused, forever lost. Only an instant in each time meant I would never be able to speak with anyone else, never be able to hold a conversation, never express or receive love. As the true depth of that fear came upon me, I sat in an older version of me and watched the snow falling outside. That was the one constant in my life. The weather didn't care who I was or what pains I had to face. Nature was always there. The falling snow was always like a little hook that kept me in a place. The pure emotional peace it brought was like a panacea on my mental wounds. And I'd never yet shifted while watching the pattern of falling white and thinking of the times I'd gone sledding or built a snow fort as a child. A teenager touched my arm. "Grandpa?" "Eh?" He'd startled me out of my thoughts, so I was less careful than usual. "Who are you?" He half grinned, as if not sure whether I was joking. Handing me a stack of papers, he said, It's my first attempt at a novel. Would you read it and tell me what you think? Ah, of course. Pursuing that dream of being a writer, I see. He burned bright red. Trying to, anyway. All right, run off. I'll read this right now. The words were blurry, and annoyed, I looked for glasses I probably had for reading. Being old was terrible, and I wanted to leap back into a younger year, but not before I read his book. I found my glasses in a sweater pocket and began leafing through. Mar puttered in and out of the living room, still beautiful, but I had to focus. I didn't know how much time I would have there. It seemed that we had relatives over. Was it Christmas? A pair of adults and a couple kids I didn't recognize tromped through the hallway, and I saw my son, now adult, walk by, with his wife on the way out the door. As a group, the extended family began sledding outside. Finally, I finished reading the story, and I called out for my grandson. He rushed down the stairs and into the living room. How was it? Well, it's terrible, I told him truthfully. But it's terrible for all the right reasons. You're still a young man, so your characters behave like young people, but the structure of the story itself is very solid. I paused. I didn't expect it to turn out to be a horror story. He nodded. It's a reflection of the times. Expectations for the future are dismal, not hopeful like they used to be. You're far too young to be aware like that, I told him. An idea occurred to me. If you're into horror, do you know anything about strange creatures? Sure. I read everything I can. I love it. Warily, I scanned the entrances to the living room. Everyone was busy outside. For the first time, I opened up to someone in my life about what I was experiencing. In hushed tones, I told him about my fragmented consciousness. For a teenager, he took it well. You're serious? Yes. He donned the determined look of a grown man accepting a quest. I'll look into it, see what I can find out. You should start writing down everything you experience. Build some data. Maybe we can map your psychic wound. Wow. Sounds like a plan. I was surprised. That made sense, and I hadn't expected him to have a serious response. But how will I get all the notes in one place? Let's come up with somewhere for you to leave them, he said, frowning with thought. Then I'll get them, and we can trace the path you're taking through your own life, see if there's a pattern. For the first time since the situation had gotten worse, I felt hope again. How about under the stairs? Nobody ever goes under there. Sure. He turned and left the living room. I peered after him. I heard him banging around near the stairs. Finally, he returned with a box, laid it on the carpet, and opened it to reveal a bursting stack of papers. He exclaimed, "Holy crap." But of course, being a teenager, he didn't really say crap. Taken aback, I blinked rapidly, forgiving his cussing because of the shock. Did I write those? He looked up at me with wonder. Yeah. Or, you will. You still have to write them and put them under the stairs after this. He gazed back down at the papers then, covered the box. So you probably shouldn't see what they say. That could get weird. That much I understood. Right. He gulped. There are like 50 boxes under there, all filled up like this. Deciphering these will take a very long time. His tone dropped to deadly seriousness. But I will save you, Grandpa, because I don't think anyone else can. Tears flowed down my cheeks then, and I couldn't help but sob once or twice. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become in my shifting prison of awareness until I finally had someone who understood. Thank you so much. And then I was young again, and at work on a random Tuesday. Once the sadness and relief faded, anger and determination replaced them. After I finished my work, I grabbed some paper and began writing. While the weeks shifted around me, while those weeks became days and then hours, I wrote every single spare moment about when and where I thought I was. I put them under the stairs out of order. My first box was actually the 30th, and my last box was the 1st. Once I had over 50 boxes written from my perspective and, once my shifting became a matter of minutes, I knew it was up to my grandson to take it from there. I put my head down and stopped looking. I couldn't stand the river of changing awareness any longer. Names and places and dates and jobs and colors and people were all wrong and different. I'd never been older. I sat watching the snow fall. A man of at least 30 that I vaguely recognized entered the room. Come on, I think I finally figured it out. I was so frail that moving was painful. Are you him? Are you my grandson? Yes. He took me to a room filled with strange equipment and sat me in a rubber chair facing a large mirror twice the height of a man. The pattern finally revealed itself. How long have you worked on this? I asked him aghast. Tell me you didn't miss your life like I'm missing mine. His expression was both stone cold and furiously resolute. It'll be worth it. He brought 2 thin metal rods close to my arm and then nodded at the mirror. Look, this shock is carefully calibrated. The electric zap from his device was startling, but not painful. In the mirror, I saw a rapid arcing light silhouette appear above my head and shoulder. The electricity moved through the creature like a wave, briefly revealing the terrible nature of what was happening to me. A bulging, leech-like mouth was wrapped around the back of my head, coming down to my eyebrows and touching each ear, and its slug-like body ran over my shoulder and into my very soul. It was a parasite, and it was feeding on my mind. My now adult grandson held my hand as I took in the horror. After a moment, he asked, "Removing it is going to hurt very badly. Are you up for this?" Fearful, I asked, "Is Mar here?" His face softened. Number not for a few years now. I could tell from his reaction what had happened, but I didn't want it to be true. How? We have this conversation a lot, he responded. Are you sure you want to know? It never makes you feel better. Tears brimmed in my eyes. Then I don't care if it hurts or if I die. I don't want to stay in a time where she's not alive. He made a sympathetic noise of understanding and then returned to his machines to hook several wires, diodes, and other bits of technology to my limbs and forehead. While he did so, he talked. I've worked for 2 decades to figure this out, and I've had a ton of help from other researchers of the occult. This parasite doesn't technically exist in our plane. It's one of the lesser spawns of Mu, and it feeds on the plexus of mind, soul, and quantum consciousness, reality. When details like names and colors of objects changed, you weren't going crazy. The web of your existence was merely losing strands as the creature ate its way through you. I didn't fully understand. I looked up in confusion as he placed a circlet of electronics like a crown on my head, in exact line with where the parasite's mouth had ringed me. What's Mu? He paused his work and grew pale. I forgot that you wouldn't know. You're lucky, believe me. After a deep breath, he began moving again and placed his fingers near a few switches. Ready? This is carefully tuned to make your nervous system extremely unappetizing to the parasite, but it's basically electroshock therapy. I could still see Mar's smile. Even though she was dead, I'd just been with her moments ago. Do it. The click of a switch echoed in my ears, and I almost laughed at how mild the electricity was. It didn't feel like anything, at least at first. Then, I saw the mirror shaking, and my body within that image convulsing. Oh, number. It did hurt. Nothing had ever been more painful. It was just so excruciating that my mind hadn't been able to immediately process it. As my vision shook and fire burned in every nerve in my body, I could see the reflected trembling light silhouette of the parasite on my head as it writhed in agony equal to mine. It had clawed lizard-like limbs under its leech-like body, and it cut into me in an attempt to stay latched on. The electricity made my memories flare. Mar's smile was foremost, lit brightly in front of a warm fire as the snow fell past the window behind her. The edges of that memory began lighting up, and I realized that my life was one continuous stretch of experience. It was only the awareness of it that had been fragmented by that feasting evil on my back. I'd never managed to be there for the birth of my son. I jumped around it a dozen times, but never actually lived it. For the first time, I got to hold Mar's hand and be there for her. No. That moment had shifted seamlessly into holding her hand as she lay in a hospital bed for a very different reason. Not this. God, why? It was so merciless to make me remember this. I broke down in tears as nurses rushed into the room. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to experience it. I'd seen all the good parts, but I hadn't wanted the worst part, the inevitable end that all would one day face. It wasn't worth it. It was tainted. All that joy was given back 10,000-fold as pain. The fire in my body and in my brain surged to sheer white torture, and I screamed. My scream faded into a surprised shout as the machines and electricity and chair faded away. Snow was no longer falling around my life. I was out in the woods on a bright summer day. Oh God. I turned to see the creature approaching me. It was the same absence of meaning, the same blank on reality. It crept forward, just like before, but this time, it hissed and turned away. I stood, astounded at being young again and freed from the parasite. My grandson had actually done it. He'd made me an unappetizing meal, so the predator of mind and soul had moved on in search of a different snack. I returned home in a daze, and while I was sitting there processing all that had happened, the phone rang. I looked at it in awe and sadness. I knew who it was. It was Marjorie, calling for the first time for some trivial reason she'd admit 30 years later was made up just to talk to me. But all I could see was her lying in that hospital bed dying. It was going to end in unspeakable pain and loneliness. I would become an old man, left to sit by myself in an empty house, his soulmate gone long before him. At the end of it all, the only thing I would have left, sitting and watching the falling snow. But now, thanks to my grandson, I would also have my memories. It would be a wild ride, no matter how it ended. On a sudden impulse, I picked up the phone. With a smile, I asked, "Hey, who's this?" Even though I already knew. Story: The Hymn of Hard Luck. There were already about a dozen people in the room when I walked in. Walk is a charitable description for the way I half-dragged, half-stumbled through the double doors. We were meeting in an old church hall, the kind of place that played host to bingo and Christmas bazaars since the beginning of time. The crowd was a mix of bright-eyed and burned out. We all milled around, tired souls in a wobbly cluster in front of a craft services table. I took a glazed donut and a drink and found a seat. The metal chairs were as cold as the coffee. 11 of us sat in a rough semicircle, quietly chewing and sipping, and watching the hands of the clock drag so slow they must have been wearing cuffs. The group trended older, though there were a few fresher faces. I made eye contact with a nervous man wearing a new blazer with a t-shirt underneath. He looked familiar, like a mirror I might have met a decade ago. We had similar, sharp features, coarse jaws, shaky hands. The two of us even had the short same haircut, though he was only starting to go gray at the temples while I looked like a dirty field with a heavy dusting of snow. I raised my coffee cup in greeting. "Howdy." The man just smiled tightly and nodded. Then he glanced down to study the hall's tile work. I could tell this was his first meeting. He'd loosen up as we went, I was sure of it. Talking about your demons was like diving into cold water. You resisted, then the shock hit you, but eventually, you got used to the temperature, and there was some measure of comfort. Once we were all settled, the familiar scene began. Everyone took turns talking about their week, their past, their success, and their slips. There was a rhythm in the tragedy, a hymn of hard luck. Here was the inhalation and slow release of old memories, moments swollen with pain and guilt. We each let them free in the room, and they floated like disfigured balloons between us. A shared cord wrapped around all of our necks, and when we spoke, when we opened up, the pressure loosed just a little. Then we could breathe in the good air, lovely oxygen that tasted like summer sun, and promised that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. When it was my turn, I stood up, made sure to look around the room and make eye contact. I caught the new guy's glance and nodded. He smiled back gingerly. "Hey, my name is Henry, I'm an alcoholic." I lied. "Hi, Henry," returned the chorus. "It's been a rough month," I said. That part was true. I got on the wagon, fell off the wagon, then the wagon ran me right over. Some knowing chuckles, there. The hymn of hard luck. It was a melody we all knew, a song to hum on our worst days. I went on to talk about temptation, about loss, about the ache of digging yourself a lonely well in the cold earth of your soul and crawling into the dark. The water in that well is freezing, and it makes you sick. I said, but it never runs out. It's an easy place to find when you're thirsty. I know the draw of the well, how the stones have their own gravity. One day, I want to break its violent orbit. I live for that day. Every morning I wake up hoping this is that moment, the first day of the rest of my life. You'll get there, Jerry said. He was an old-timer, a veteran of the self-waged war and fixture at these meetings. We'll all get there, he promised. I nodded and took my seat. The new guy, the one who looked so very much like a younger version of myself, was staring at me. Maybe something I said clicked for him, or maybe our shared resemblance had him thinking about the roads you walk in life and where he might be in a few years. When it was his turn to speak, he was quick and quiet. I don't think he gave his real name, and he was back in his seat in under 20 seconds. But we all welcomed him warmly, the woman sitting next to him giving his shoulder a squeeze. After the meeting, the young man approached me as I topped off my travel mug at the coffee pot. His blue eyes were bloodshot. I could smell the evergreen bitterness of gin on his breath. A little something to calm his nerves that morning, I guessed. My name is Matt, he told me, reaching out for a handshake. That wasn't the name he'd given the group. We shook. I just wanted to tell you, everything you said about the well, about breaking the orbit, I get that. It was good to hear somebody say it, to put words to the pull I feel each day. Thank you. I smiled. You're very welcome, Matt. I knew the next part. I was sure of it. A wave of need hit me hard. I squeezed my travel mug until it felt like my knuckles would slip out of my skin. Following the need was the familiar anger, the impatience. I fought it down and kept a smile carved into my face. Matt glanced around the room, then met my eye. I was wondering if you'd be willing to sponsor me. I pretended to think about it. Well, that's a heavier order than you might realize, this being your first meeting and all. Are you hungry? We can grab breakfast and talk about it. I'm not really hungry, Matt said. To tell you the truth, I haven't had much of an appetite lately. Irritation dancing up my spine. Let's go eat. Hunger has a way of sneaking up on you. Matt hesitated but nodded. I felt something relax inside of me, a sleeping need that always had one eye open. I know a quiet diner around the corner, I said. The place was empty, greasy, the sort of diner where they put pies under glass and the coffee could dissolve aluminum. I ordered food. Matt just asked for tea. We sat, and I ate, in silence. What do you think makes it stick? Matt asked me when I was halfway done my eggs. I was having a hard time focusing. The need was banging around my head like a trapped animal freshly locked in the zoo. I could hear my pulse loudly pumping. Even worse, I could hear Matt's. Under the table, my left hand would clench and unclench. There was a rising anxiety blooming in me. It was familiar, a nervous vibration that tugged at my skin, an impending sense of doom. I knew it was the withdrawal talking, promising, threatening. The shakes would come next. I sat there staring at Matt, watching him talk but not listening. His heartbeat sounded like a hammer driving a nail with every thump. My anxiety kept feeding off of itself, making more and more demands. Suddenly, I felt genuinely afraid. I was trapped, with no control. Instead of free will, I was stuck on a train track. Every day I would go to the end of the line and fall off an unfinished bridge. Then the next day I would start the ride all over again. Henry, are you okay? I came back to the moment and glanced up at Matt. Sure, I said, dragging out a smile. Just thinking. Sorry, did you ask me a question? Matt tapped his finger against the handle of his coffee mug. What do you think makes sobriety stick? I can't seem to get it to take root, you know? I'll be good, real good, and steady for a week or 2 or 3. Then, out of nowhere, I feel that gravity you talked about. That pull, and it's like a switch flips and I'm on autopilot. I shut out the little voice in my head telling me to stop, begging me. He trailed off. What's the longest you've been clean? I asked. It was last summer. I made it 59 days. Matt sighed. I got through the 4th of July and a camping trip in August. It was some random bullshit Tuesday afternoon that got me. You? I pushed my eggs away. My best stretch was 18 months and 11 days. Funny enough, it was a Tuesday afternoon that got me, as well. Nothing special that day. I was in a blue mood, I suppose, and tired. I remember the feeling creeping up on me early in the morning. It was like spotting thunderclouds on the horizon. By lunchtime, I was contemplating tying myself to a radiator or breaking my legs, anything to keep me from relapsing. Come dinner time, the numbness crept in, the resignation, and then the bargaining. I would only slip up this once. I'd earned it. I was doing fine. Tomorrow I'd go right back to 18 months and 12 days. Just like that, I crashed back into orbit. Matt was staring down at his cup. It took me a moment to realize there were tears on his cheeks. I felt nauseous, the eggs I'd just eaten threatening to come back up all over the glossy diner table. Panic nibbled at the edge of my thoughts. I didn't want to live on the rails anymore. "Why is it like this?" Matt asked. "It's like I'm drowning." "What made you want to go to the meeting today?" "I hurt people," Matt said, voice shaking. "People I cared about, one more than the rest. When she left last month, I knew I couldn't stay the same person I was, the same one I am. But it's hard, Henry. It's so hard to reset myself." "I know," I told him. "I have something that might help. I don't live far away. Do you have a little more time to spare?" "Too much," he replied, smiling sadly. "Nothing but time." I paid our check, and we left. Dark clouds on the horizon. As we walked down the city sidewalk, I tried to focus on the feeling of the winter sun on my skin. But even though it was lovely and warm for the season, all I could find when I closed my eyes, besides the usual daytime burn, was the pull of a terrible gravity. "Would you like a drink?" I called out from the kitchen. I heard Matt laugh from the living room. "More than anything," he admitted. "But sure, water would be fine." We were in my apartment, a cozy brownstone I'd lived in for, I'm not even sure how many years now. I'd moved in sometime before Matt was born, I'm sure. Probably before his parents and grandparents as well. I poured him a glass of water and pulled the rolled up sheet of plastic out from a cabinet above the refrigerator. Matt accepted the water with a puzzled look. "What's that for?" "I'm a bit of a germaphobe and you'd be amazed how much this helps with cleanup," I said, placing the plastic on the floor between us. I unrolled the thin, clear material. It was a plastic square 6 feet across. When I stood up, I saw Matt's confusion begin to evolve into panic. "Why do?" he began, the rest of his sentence trapped when my right hand caught his throat. Matt looked surprised. I moved awfully quick. He struggled and clawed and wheezed. But I had a grip like a prison gate, and once it was closed, it would only open in its own time. I did not let him suffer. Matt's windpipe crumbled between my fingers like a styrofoam cup. When I pulled my hand back, it was red and wet. He fell and I gently steered him to land on the plastic. The room smelled like meat and copper. Matt's mouth was opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. The hole in his throat prevented him from forming words, but I knew what he was asking. "Why me?" I knelt down and put a hand on Matt's shoulder. There were tears in my eyes. "It's nothing you did," I promised him. "And I'm no one to judge you anyway. Part of it, well, it's just bad luck. The rest is because I thought you would understand." I went back into the kitchen to find an empty glass while Matt bled to death on my floor. Story: Space Girl. We called her Space Girl. Her real name was Megan Daniels, but nobody actually called her that. She'd been Space Girl since grade 2. She was the kind of kid who stuck out in the crowd with her long red hair, ghostly pale skin, and Coke bottle glasses. For as long as I'd known her, Space Girl had been quiet. She didn't like to be around us. She didn't play with us when we were kids. She didn't even talk much. Most of the time, she'd find somewhere to sit, far away from everyone else. Then she'd open up her little notebook and scribble inside of it. Sometimes she wrote poems, sometimes she drew. But she was always off on her own little world. Nowadays, I understand why we targeted her. She was different, and she was alone. That doesn't justify any of it, but kids can be cruel. I remember that it was Sasha Brown who told me that Space Girl was retarded because her mother was on drugs. She probably just made that up, but we all believed it. She had always been the worst towards Space Girl, and she kept that up until the end. It all started in grade 5 when Sasha took her notebook. It had been raining that day, so we'd had an indoor recess. Space Girl sat in the corner at her desk, eyes focused on her notebook, as she methodically worked on a drawing. Sasha and I had been sitting nearby at our desks, and we simply just watched her do her thing. "I can't believe they let that retard sit in with us," Sasha murmured. "Look at her. Why do they even let them in schools? They aren't going to learn anything." "Better than leaving her at home with her crackhead mom," said Tanya Everett. She and I weren't exactly friends, but she sat close to Sasha and I. "My dad says he sees a different car in front of her house every day. He says that she lets boys come and they pay her so they can have sex. None of us could actually say the dreaded S word at the time. Sex was still a terrible unknown thing, and we all had been raised to believe that nobody decent would ever do it." Space Girl paused, and her eyes darted away from her book to look at us. I can only imagine she'd heard us. Sasha just stared right back at her. "What? Do you have a problem, Space Girl?" she asked. The teacher was out of earshot, and that gave her carte blanche to say whatever she wanted. Space Girl didn't respond. She just looked back down at her notebook, but Sasha had been challenged, or at least she thought she'd been. She looked over to the teacher's desk to make sure she was busy, then she got up and moved closer to Space Girl. "What are you even doing in there, retard?" She'd reached out to snatch the book before Space Girl could stop her. "What even is this? A unicorn? What are you, 5? She handed the book to me, and I took it on instinct. There was a brightly colored drawing of a unicorn inside. The artwork was actually pretty nice, but I would never have said so. The book was passed on to Tanya next, and Space Girl could only look at us helplessly. "Wow, you can't even draw. Look at this." She tore the page out of the notebook, and Space Girl let out a startled whimper, as if she'd been struck. The picture was crumpled up and the book was thrown on the floor by Space Girl's desk. "Draw something that isn't trash next time," Tanya said, and Sasha just giggled, as if it was anything other than being mean-spirited, just for the sake of it. Space Girl slowly picked her book up off the floor, avoiding eye contact as Tanya and Sasha turned away from her. I continued to stare. I remember that the way she moved was so defeated, as if she were shrinking in on herself. She looked up at me, but only for a moment, and I felt bad for her. I really did, but I didn't do anything about it. I just left her to rejoin the others. After that, Space Girl became an easy target for Sasha and Tanya. Every chance they got, they'd harass her, and I regret to admit that I was usually right there with them. During the days where we could go outside for recess, Space Girl would always sit beneath the same tree, always working in her notebook. When she did, we would always lean on the trunk and look down over Space Girl's shoulder. "Wow, that's really good, Space Girl," was how most of her comments would start. "Did you mean to draw it like it got hit by a truck, or is that just your style?" There was never a compliment. She would always find something to needle. "Can you draw me?" Sasha asked once. "I heard that retards were always like art geniuses or something. Maybe it'll even look like a person." Space Girl didn't look up at her. She seemed to be trying not to acknowledge the insults. I won't pretend like I was blameless either. I never stopped them, and there were plenty of times where I was right there, making fun of her because that was what we did, and we weren't the only ones. More or less everyone hurt her in some way or another. But she never complained. I think she was too scared to. It was late December in 7th grade where things got even worse. I don't know all the details, and I don't know just for how long things had been boiling over, but I'd heard a rumor that James Hardy had it out for Space Girl. James had only been in my class a few times, and he wasn't in my class that year. He was a small, mousy-looking kid who was convinced he was the world's toughest gangster. The rumors said that someone had seen his dad going into Space Girl's house. Naturally, there had been speculation that they'd been having sex. Someone told me that James's parents had been divorcing because of it. Somehow all of these rumors had mutated into claims that James and Space Girl were dating, and I think that was what had rubbed him the wrong way. We were coming in from recess when some boys decided to pull a little prank on James. The whole prank had been set up by Brian Jordan and his brother Mike. They had some mistletoe for the holiday season and had set it up in the hall leading back to our classroom. Mike had grabbed Space Girl during recess and were holding her behind the door where the mistletoe was. When James walked through, they pushed her at him and snapped a picture. I'd been just behind James when it happened. I watched as Space Girl came flying out of seemingly nowhere, eyes wide and afraid, then slammed into James. They both hit the ground, and I could hear the other boys laughing. "Look!" She wanted to give you a kiss, one the boy said. Space Girl was trying to crawl away from James and pick up her notebook, but somebody had kicked it out of sight. I remember that she looked back towards James, and there were tears in her eyes. She must have been terrified with everything that was going on. She clearly hadn't wanted any part in this, but there she was at the center of it. "You fucking faggot assholes," James yelled as he picked himself up. "Hey, she just wanted to give you a smooch," offed Brian. "Come on, give her a kiss." Someone pushed Space Girl towards James, and he glared at her as if all of this was her fault. She tried to stand and run, but he was angry and he wasn't thinking straight. I watched as he grabbed her and hit her. A square punch to the jaw. Then he tossed her to the ground and went after Brian next. A teacher had to get in to pull James off of him. He, Space Girl, and the Jordan brothers ended up getting suspended right before the Christmas holidays. We didn't see Space Girl until January. We didn't see James or his friends ever again. On Christmas Eve, there was a car accident on the highway outside of my town. Supposedly it had swerved off the road to avoid an animal of some kind and gone into a ditch. Mike, Brian, and their parents didn't survive. On the 27th of December, James was killed while outside shoveling his driveway. My parents told me that he'd been attacked by an animal, probably a deer or something, but that seemed so unusual. I'd never heard anything about deer attacking people before, especially not in my area. I went over to Sasha's house on the day before New Year's. We'd both gotten some gift cards for Christmas, and we were planning to walk to the mall together to use them. Her parents weren't home, they both had to work. So it was just us when I got there. "Hey, kept me waiting," she said when I knocked on the door. "Sorry, it's fine. I'll be ready in a bit. Come on upstairs, I want to show you something." I didn't question what it was. I figured it was just something else she'd gotten for Christmas, so I went upstairs with her. "You're gonna love it," she promised me. "It's gonna be so funny." She led me to her bedroom, and as soon as she opened the door, I spotted a familiar notebook on her desk. "Where did you get this?" I asked, walking closer to it. Space Girl dropped it when Brian and his brother pulled that prank the other day. She dropped it. I may have grabbed it, just for safekeeping. She cracked a wry grin before opening the notebook. "Look at this. She's been drawing the same damn unicorns forever. She didn't even finish this one." She paused at one small picture that was labeled The Unicorn Prince. It depicted an empty field with a blank space where the titular prince should have been. Sasha flipped through the pages a little more until she got to the newer ones. I figured since they kicked Space Girl out for a little while, and her mom is too poor to get her anything for the holidays, I'd step up. What do you think? Sasha wasn't anywhere near as good of an artist as Space Girl was, but the simple detail in what she had drawn turned my stomach. In her first picture, Space Girl was hanging from a rope, her tongue was hanging out, and her eyes were closed. In the second one, Space Girl had a gun in her mouth. In the third one, she was standing on the edge of a building. Sasha giggled as I flipped through her crude depictions of suicide. There were pages of them. "What do you think?" she asked with a grin. "I'll bet she'll lose her shit." I closed the notebook and looked over at Sasha. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked. Sasha's grin faded. "What do you mean?" "You stole her notebook just so you could draw these? Sasha, that's really messed up." "It's Space Girl. Who the hell cares about Space Girl, Jane? You just drew her killing herself over and over again." I took the book off her desk. "Do you not understand what's wrong with that?" Sasha just stared at me like I was crazy. "Fine. Sue me for trying to be funny." Sasha said, "Just give it here." She outstretched a hand to take the notebook, but I pulled back from her. "Number, you're just going to put something else in there." Anger flared in Sasha's eyes. "Jane, just give me the book." "No." I opened the book, and I started to tear out those pages of Space Girl's suicide. Sasha lunged for me, trying to grab at the book and stop me, but pushed her back. I didn't mean to push so hard, but I did, and she fell, landing hard on the ground. For a moment, Sasha looked up at me, wide-eyed and shocked. I don't think anyone had laid a hand on her like that before. Then I saw something in her eyes, not just anger, something worse. It was the same thing that had prompted her to draw those horrible pictures of Space Girl. I turned and I ran, bolting down her stairs and out her front door, back into the snow. I clutched Space Girl's notebook to my chest the entire time, and I didn't let it go until I got home. I spent the rest of the Christmas break terrified that my parents would get a call from Sasha's lie pushed her, and that seemed like such a big deal at the time. In hindsight, I doubt Sasha would have told her parents what had happened. They would have asked why I'd pushed her, and I would have told them about the notebook. On some level, she must have known that what she'd done was wrong. She was a cruel person, but there was a limit. Part of me hoped that she'd realize that I was right, and we could patch things up when school started again. But honestly, I wasn't so sure. I remember looking through Space Girl's drawings, the ones that she'd done. I remembered the ones I'd made fun of the most. There was one with a mermaid on a rock, combing her hair. Her eyes were closed in a relaxed bliss. I remembered saying how stupid her facial expression had looked, but honestly, I kinda liked it. I flipped through the pages some more, through unicorns, fairies, and castles. But I paused at the page depicting the unicorn prince. Back at Sasha's place, it had been blank, but at my house it was finished. The unicorn prince stood proudly in his field, looking skywards with his horn proudly displayed. Maybe I had been thinking of a different picture? I brushed it off and flipped to the back where Sasha's pictures were. One by one, I started tearing them out of the notebook and tossing them in the trash. It was a waste of paper, but I refused to give it back to Space Girl with those images still in it. On the first day back to school, I was up early. I made sure the notebook was packed into my bag and was out as early as I could be. The snow on the ground was almost pristine as I walked to school, but I remember seeing some tracks on my lawn, headed down the side of my house. Deep U-shaped indents that looked like they'd been made by hooves. A deer, perhaps? I didn't dwell on them and made my way down the freshly shoveled sidewalk and back to school. I wasn't entirely sure if Space Girl would be back yet, but she was. She was alone in the classroom, sitting at her desk and drawing in a brand new notebook. She paused briefly when I walked in to join her, and I could see her side-eyeing me. She didn't say a word as I drew nearer, but I thought I saw her shoulders tense up ever so slightly. "Hey," I said, I hope you had a nice holiday." She didn't respond. "I'm sorry about what happened the other day. I didn't know anything about it, but it just seemed really mean-spirited." Still no answer. I reached into my backpack, taking out her old notebook. I put it on her desk in front of her. She stared at it, still silent, then back at me. Sasha took it. I was over at her house the other day and she showed it to me. I had to take some pages out, but she drew some really awful things in there. I didn't think it would be right to give it back with those things in there. I paused, feeling smaller as Space Girl stared at me. She didn't seem angry or thankful. She didn't seem anything at all. Just stoic. "I'm sorry if I wasn't all that great to you before," I said, and then I shuffled off to my desk. Space Girl waited until I sat down before she opened her notebook and inspected it. Then she closed her new book and started something new on a fresh page in her old one. It wasn't much, but it made me feel at least a little good for what I'd done. When Sasha got in, she didn't talk to me. She didn't even look at me. Neither did Tanya or any of our other mutual friends. I knew from the moment they walked in that I'd burned my bridges with them, but I still wanted to try. The teacher hadn't come in yet, so I figured it might be worth it to try and talk to Sasha. I got up to move closer to her, and she gave me a look of utter disgust. "What do you want?" she spat. Now it was my turn to be silent. "Fuck off and leave us alone," Tanya said. "You'd obviously rather hang out with the fucking retard than us, and I really don't want you spreading your retard germs to us. It's a quarantine issue." I stared at both of them, and I could have sworn I knew how Space Girl felt. What was I supposed to say to any of that? Instead, I just returned to my desk without a word. Space Girl stared at me the entire time. Her pencil rested over her notebook, but she didn't write anything. She set it down, tore out the page she'd been writing on, and jammed it into her pocket. I later saw her toss it into the trash during lunch. I didn't really have anyone left, so I thought that maybe it might be a good idea to pull it out. Maybe it was something she wasn't happy with? I'd never seen her throw a drawing out before. I was thinking that maybe I could use it as a peace offering of sorts, or something along those lines. When I saw what she'd written on it, I almost threw it back into the trash. Your words. There is a land where your sorry may go. A sickening land where it always snows. The snow is putrid in color and smell. Its substance, filth, and things I won't tell. Only your father has been there before. One day your boyfriend will visit once more. This place in your carcass, this humanoid hell. Your sorry can go there to this hole in your shell. My unsubtle message, this subtextual jazz, is take your apology and stuff it up your ass. This was unlike anything I'd ever seen her write. It was so crass and spiteful. This was as close to hatred as she could have gotten. I understood why she'd thrown it out. It didn't fit with everything else she'd done. Those things had been beautiful, despite what people had said to her. This was angry and ugly. This was something she'd written for me. I put it in my pocket. I wasn't going to give it back to her, but I wanted to keep it. I wanted to remember the way I'd made her feel. 8th grade wasn't fun for me. I had very few friends left, and Sasha never forgave me for turning on her. Her version of the story was slowly warped as time went on. First, I'd punched her and stolen the book. Then I'd tried to kiss her, punched her when she'd refused, then stole the book to try and get her in trouble. Rumors of me being a dyke spread pretty quickly, and hot on their heels came the rumors that I was dating Space Girl. I tried not to let them bother me too much. I knew the truth, and at the end of the day, I'd done the right thing. By the time high school rolled around, I was hoping for a fresh start. There were new faces, and I figured I could make friends with them before Sasha's rumors spread. I had a bit of success in that department. I fell in with a better crowd at least. Sasha stuck with her same old clique. It grew ever so slightly, but she was determined to live out the movie Mean Girls, and most people didn't pay her any mind. Space Girl barely changed at all. I didn't see her much when high school started. She was in a few of my classes, but I rarely saw her outside of them. Whenever she had a moment, she'd be in the library, usually in one of the corner cubicles, working on her drawings. Sometimes I thought about talking to her and trying to strike up a friendship, but it never felt right. Sasha's bullying never let up, of course. Of course, she stalked Space Girl to the library where she'd pull the same old shit she'd been pulling since the 5th grade. She'd leer over her cubicle and comment on her drawings, picking them apart just like she always had. I stopped her whenever I saw it, but I didn't always see it. Coming to her rescue again, huh, Jane? Sasha asked once when I'd interrupted her. Tanya leered at me from behind her, chewing gum with her mouth open. What's she ever done to you anyways? I asked. She's just minding her own business. Oh? What's she done to you, dyke? Sasha hissed. She leaned down over her cubicle and looked down at the notebook. Unicorns. Unicorns, unicorns. Fucking unicorns. When are you going to grow up, Space Girl? Hey, I told you to stop. I rounded the cubicle, and I saw Sasha recoil. For a moment, I saw a bit of fear in her eyes. It vanished quickly, and was replaced with a familiar rage. Fine, she said. Tan, let's leave the happy couple to their alone time. She pulled away from the cubicle, and disappeared with Tanya nipping at her heels like a faithful terrier. Space Girl remained hunched over her notebook, her long red hair spilling over her shoulders. She seemed impossibly still. I turned to leave her when I heard, "Thanks." I looked back at her and saw that she was looking at me. You're welcome," I said. "Let me know if she bothers you again, all right?" "I will, but you're usually there anyways." Her voice was soft and low. I'd heard it before, but I don't remember her ever speaking directly to me. "Yeah, well, it's just not right. She's such a child. One of these days she's going to have to grow up." Space Girl just nodded, looking over towards the library door, then back down at her notebook again. For a moment, I thought about asking her about what she was drawing. I thought about saying something else, but I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I left her alone again. In 10th grade, I took art as an elective. I wasn't much of an artist, but I figured it would be an easy course. To the surprise of no one, Space Girl was there. I actually asked her to work with me on a few group projects. I think the prospect of being asked to work together was foreign to her. She looked at me suspiciously when I did it, but when she smiled, it was the biggest smile I'd ever seen. I went to her house for the first time to work on a portrait project with her once. We were supposed to take turns drawing portraits of each other, and I'd volunteered to let her draw me first. Rumors of her mother had always surrounded Space Girl, so I wasn't entirely sure what to expect when I got there. I certainly wasn't expecting the quiet, neatly kept house that I found. The woman who answered the door looked like an older version of her daughter, sans the Coke bottle glasses. "You must be Jane," she said. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't sound upset either. "Yes, ma'am." "Come on in, Megan's upstairs. She was just getting ready for you." The house was warm with plenty of knickknacks on the walls, plates and porcelain dolls mostly. Her mom sent me upstairs and I didn't waste any time. On the landing leading up to Space Girl's room, I could see a mural of family photos and paused to look at them. I could recognize Space Girl and her mother in most of them. Space Girl never seemed to be smiling. I only saw her father in a few of the very early pictures. Space Girl looked like she was only a young child in the few pictures I saw him in, though. I didn't dwell for long and headed towards what I assumed was her room. The cardboard stars and planets on it gave it away. Sure enough, she was inside waiting for me. She sat facing the door behind an easel in the center of her room. Her bed was neatly made and tucked away in the corner. She had a clean little desk that she'd clearly been working on and had set a chair out for me to sit on. I hadn't expected something so overwhelmingly formal, and I almost started laughing. But then I noticed her walls. They weren't just covered in drawings. The art pieces on them were full-on paintings. They were the same fantasy depictions she usually did, but the colors were so vivid. The clouds looked like fluffy pillows, and the castles seemed great and infinite. "Holy shit, are these yours?" "They are," Space Girl said softly. She stood up and took the plate of cookies from me, then moved it to her desk. It's soothing," she said after a while. "Painting, I mean. I picked the drawings I liked the most and I finished them." She spoke slowly, like she was carefully choosing her words. I almost felt like there was something that she was trying to avoid. I spotted a painting on the floor that looked like her father. The style was the same, but the content was different. He was surrounded by awkward scribbles, and he looked completely and utterly terrified. Space Girl looked down at it, but she seemed to disapprove of it. She turned it around so I wouldn't have to look at it. "We should get started," she said. "Sorry." "No, it's all right," I said. I sat in the chair for her. "I'd like to hear about it." Space Girl watched me from the corner of her eye for a moment, as if she doubted I was being serious. But eventually she sat down behind the easel and started to draw. Soon after that, she was talking too. I stayed long after she'd gotten what she needed for her sketch, just to talk. She told me that she'd always liked fantasy, and how she liked unicorns because they were simple but pretty. I hung on to every word, and I could have sworn I saw her smiling shyly as she talked. The portrait she'd done of me was something else entirely. Her work had always been beautiful, but this made me look transcendent. I wasn't entirely sure that I was looking at myself at first. There was something about the look on my face. There was a small, almost content smile there. The warmth it conveyed was almost Disney-esque. "I love it," I told her. "That's incredible, Spa. Megan, that's really great." "You can call me Space Girl if you want," she said. "I don't mind the nickname. Not as much as I mind the people, at least." My awe quickly turned to shame, but Space Girl didn't look upset. She just stared at me blankly, like she so often did. No, not blankly. Her face might not have conveyed much emotion, but there was definitely some emotion there. I wish I'd been nicer to you when we were younger," I said. "Is that why you're here right now?" Space Girl asked. "No, I'm here for the assignment. I mean, the art assignment, the portraits." She continued to stare. "Did you pick me because you felt bad for me?" she asked. "No, I just thought it would be cool to work with you." Space Girl didn't react for a moment, but then she just nodded. "Okay." Her flat tone made it hard to know what she meant by that. She stood up and walked over to the portrait. "Mom can drive you home if you need a ride," she said. I opened my mouth to say something else. I wanted to apologize, but I didn't know what. Had I offended her? Had I said something wrong? "All right, thanks." It was the only thing I could think of. "See you tomorrow." With that, I left her. I was almost afraid to see Space Girl the next morning. I drifted through my classes that day until I reached art, and when I did, I wasn't expecting what I saw. She had clearly been up late, but what she'd brought in stole my breath away. It was my portrait, but she'd done more with it than I thought possible. She'd painted over the sketch, turning me into something beautiful. Flowers bloomed around my brown hair, and a crown of daisies, lilies, and chrysanthemums adorned my head. The colors were so vivid, and I looked so at peace in it. Space Girl was looking right at me as I came in, as if she was gauging my reaction, but all I could do was stare wide-eyed and in awe. When I looked back at Space Girl, she was smiling at me. Her project single-handedly netted us an A on the project, and got the privilege of being hung up outside of the art classroom. Of course I told her how much I loved it, and I remember the way she smiled when I did. I remember thinking that it was the cutest smile I'd ever seen. My portrait was up for barely even a day before Sasha had to make a comment. I'd been on my lunch, and had just gotten some fries from the cafeteria when she and Tanya ambushed me. "Where's your flower crown, dyke?" Sasha said. "Leave me alone," I said, brushing past them, but Sasha was out for blood. "I always knew you were a little dyke, but now you've posted solid proof of it. We've gone and cracked the case, haven't we? So what happened? Did you go to her house and lick her retarded little snatch? You must be a real good dyke because she went and drew that for you." I tried to walk away from her, but Sasha and Tanya just kept following me. "What's wrong? Am I not pretty enough for you, dyke?" She snapped at me. "Maybe she only fucks retarded girls." Tanya said, "I'll bet Space Girl squealed like a pig when she came." I stopped dead in my tracks, and I heard Sasha stop behind me. I don't know what it was about what she'd said that pissed me off so much, but those two had finally struck a nerve. I spun around, swinging my lunch tray as hard as I could. Fries were scattered everywhere, but although I was aiming for Tanya, I hit Sasha. She went down hard, and I'm not sure if she was even still conscious when she hit the ground. Tanya was on me in an instant. She slammed me back against a wall and kept me pinned. She had size and strength on me, and there wasn't a thing I could do to stop her. Several other students grabbed at us. A teacher finally got involved, and all three of us got escorted to see the principal. As we left the cafeteria, I saw Space Girl in one of the halls, just staring at me. Naturally, I got a 3-day suspension, but Tanya and Sasha were fine. Both of them said they'd just been walking, and I attacked unprovoked. It was their word against mine. Sasha had a familiar shit-eating grin on as she left the office with only a bruise on her forehead to show for her troubles, but there was a familiar look in her eyes. That same anger I'd seen last time I'd laid a hand on her, and something about it scared me. When I came back to school, I realized that I had every reason to be afraid. My portrait was missing. I wondered if they'd taken it down because I'd attacked Sasha, but the truth was a lot worse. "Someone took it," Space Girl said. She was sitting in her usual spot in the library when I found her, sketching flowers in her notebook. "When?" "The day after you hit Sasha. I don't think anyone's found it yet." She didn't look up at me, just stayed focused on her art. She didn't need to say it for me to know who she blamed. Who else would it be? I had half a mind to confront Sasha about it, but I didn't know if that would be a good idea or not. Sasha could easily just cry wolf. I wouldn't put it past her. In the end, it didn't matter. By the time I was headed to art class, the painting was back. But there had been some modifications made to it. The words, "Retard fucking dyke," had been painted across my portrait in bright red. I saw it from down the hall and could see some other students whispering amongst themselves beneath it. I didn't know what to say or do, but this felt like too much. The picture was taken down quickly, but the damage was done. Sasha had gotten her revenge, and it didn't stop with just the painting. Space Girl looked different than when I'd seen her in the library. She seemed uneasy, and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "I'm sorry about the painting," I said softly. She looked at me, before sighing. "I knew she'd do something like that." She said, "I'm so used to it by now that it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm sorry she wrote those things about you, though. But you worked hard on that." I said, "I'd be upset too." She just shook her head. "That's not it," she said. She reached into her pocket pulling out a crumpled up piece of paper, then slid it over to me. Slowly, I uncrumpled the paper, and my eyes widened as I recognized what was on it. It wasn't the same drawing, but it was close enough. It was a depiction of Space Girl hanging herself, and me beside her. A caption read, "Retard Dyke Wedding." "There were so many in my locker," Space Girl said. "This is what she drew in your notebook when I returned it to you. This is what I had to take out." Space Girl looked down at the picture again, before averting her eyes. She didn't pay much attention during class. Instead of taking notes, she sketched in her notebook. I looked over a few times to see her drawing another unicorn. This one seemed so similar to the one I'd seen before. She must not have been quite happy with it, though. When I looked back at her notebook, the unicorn wasn't there anymore. She must have just erased it, but it seemed so clean, like it hadn't been erased at all. Tanya was following me on my walk home that evening. I didn't know what she had in mind, but I didn't want to put up with it. When I was in the middle of a small walking path that cut behind some of the houses on my street, I stopped and looked at Tanya as she kept approaching. "What do you want?" I asked. "It's a surprise," she said. "Sasha and I just want you to know how much we love dykes in this town." Oops, I've said too much. I wanted to hit her. Dear God, I just wanted to hit her, but we both knew she could overpower me. Whatever Tanya had in mind, it wasn't anything good. She drew closer to me, unafraid of anything I'd do. "Come on, Dyke, go home," she said. "Let's go check out your surprise." In a sudden horrible moment, I realized that Tanya was threatening me. I also realized that I couldn't outrun her. I couldn't fight her off. I didn't really have much of a choice but to do as she asked. Slowly, I turned and walked towards my house, with Tanya at my heels. It wasn't far, and up ahead I could see Sasha sitting on a park bench. From a distance, I recognized the red gas can beside her, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Tanya seized me by the arm and pulled me towards the bench. Sasha just watched with a wide, manic grin. "Hey Jane," she said. "How's it going?" "What the fuck is this?" "Just wanted to chat," Sasha said with a cold chuckle. "You think you can get away with pulling the shit you did the other day? Number. You've been treating me like garbage for years, and for what? Because of Space Girl? You know who you're fucking choosing, right? Right? God, I hate that retard girl, but you know what? I hate you even more. Acting like you're better than me just because you feel bad for her. You're crazy." Sasha just laughed. "I'm not the one who clocked someone with a fucking tray just for a little bit of teasing. You're absolutely fucking psycho." On the bench behind her, I saw the portrait that Space Girl had painted of me. Sasha picked it up and tossed it in front of me, then picked up the gas can and dumped it onto the canvas. "You want to be a dyke, I don't care, but I'm not letting you and your retarded whore put your shit up. So say goodbye to your little project, slut." Sasha reached into her pocket and took out a book of matches. Her grin widened, before suddenly vanishing outright as she looked at something behind us. "What the hell?" Tanya said, and I craned my neck to try and see what they were seeing. As for believing it, that was another story entirely. Standing on the path behind us was a unicorn, but the way it looked was all wrong. This was nothing like a regular horse. Its body was plain white and almost textureless, save for the many thin blue lines that ran along its body. It looked like it had been cut out from a sheet of lined paper, but that was impossible. It had to be impossible. Neatly done gray lines defined the shape of the horse. In fact, the lines reminded me of the ones Space Girl used. This unicorn looked like it had walked out of one of her notebooks. Tanya let me go and stumbled back a few steps, wide-eyed as she stared at the advancing unicorn. It let out an angry noise before charging straight for Tanya. She panicked and tried to run. In her desperation to escape, she bolted down the path, but she couldn't outrun the paper unicorn. It lowered its head as it drew nearer to her, and in one swift movement, the horn pierced Tanya's back, impaling her straight through the chest. She screamed as she was hoisted off the ground, and the unicorn circled back to fix Sasha in a murderous glare. Tanya looked down at the massive spike sticking out of her, her eyes clearly wide with horror, and her body twitching its last spasms as the life quickly drained from her. The unicorn lowered its head to let her slide off of its horn, and she hit the ground in a bundle of limbs. Sasha and I stared in silent horror as the unicorn reared up on its hind legs and brought its hooves down upon Tanya's body. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply lay there as she was trampled again and again. I can only hope she died quickly. Sasha dropped the unlit match and took a slow, terrified step back before toppling over. I stumbled back and looked down to see the portrait of me at her feet, but it had changed. That beautifully painted version of me was now leaning out of the canvas, invading the real world and clutching Sasha's leg tightly. Still, with that look of contentment on her face, I watched as the painted me slowly slipped back into her panting, and she took Sasha's leg with her. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Sasha desperately swatted at the painted me, but she couldn't overpower it. She couldn't escape. Her nails tried to dig into the pavement as she was slowly dragged into the canvas. She looked at me in horror, silently begging for help, but all I could do was stare back at her in silence. Jane, help. Please, please. The hands of the painted me reached up, seizing Sasha by the hair and forcing her down into the canvas. It was like watching something pull her underwater. 1 minute she was there, the next she was gone. I stood silent in the park, staring at the painting, then at the paper unicorn. The unicorn huffed before retreating off into the woods, and then I was alone. Slowly, I approached the painting, and I looked down at it. It had changed, and now it depicted Sasha, her mouth open in a horrified final scream. After some hesitation, I picked up the painting. I could return it to Space Girl in the morning. They chalked Tanya's death up to an animal attack, and nobody ever found Sasha. I never asked Space Girl about what I saw. I don't think even she knew the answer, although she certainly knew much more than I did. High school was 10 years ago, though, and I've chosen not to remember as much as I can. I've got my own life to live now, and I try not to ask so many questions. Sometimes I see paintings move, but I don't bother with the second glance, and I never ask my wife about them. She doesn't like to talk about it, and I won't ever force her. The painting of Sasha hangs in her studio at home, right beside the painting of her father. Sometimes I look at it and I wonder if maybe things could have been different, but I don't feel too guilty about it. I wouldn't feel too guilty if I heard another story about a suspicious trampling or animal attack either, but to my knowledge, there's been nothing of the sort. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. I do my best to make sure nobody hurts my beautiful space girl. Mysteries are everywhere, and some may be closer than you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mystery. See you in the next story.